Hello friends, this is Dr. Kazmi. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and today I'm going to talk about public policy. Those of you who have watched my first video on the basics of policy making, they would understand that the policy is defined as a course of action or inaction by the government in response to public problems. So, in that very lecture, I had touched the definition and I had dissected the definition of policy word by word. So, the purpose of that lecture was to make you understand that what is meant by policy. Now, if you have understood policy, then it's fine. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about what are the models of policy making and how policy and power are related to one another. In other words, how policy and power politics they interact to influence public decisions. Now, if you haven't understood, and if you don't know what is public policy, I would request you to go back and watch my video on basics of policy making. But if you have understood it, then it's the right time to delve further into this topic. So today's video is about models of policy making. In other words, what I want to explain to you is that how policies are made. Now, there are different models to make policy, and in fact, there are four models. But for practical reason, I would say there are three models of policy making. The first model, again, which is more of a theoretical model, is what we call as the model of rationality. So, or another word is the rational model of policy making. Then we have got another model which is known as the bounded rationality model of policy making. The third one is known as the incrementalist model of policy making, and the fourth one is known as mixed scanning. So keep it in mind that there are four models: rational model, the bounded rationality, the incrementalist model, and number four, the mixed scanning. So let's start with the very first one, that is the rational model. Now, the rational, as the word rational says, it means that it is based on logic. It's based on common sense. So what happens in the rational model of policy making is that the policy makers, and I will come to in a moment to who are the policy makers and how policies are made. Please keep it in mind that whosoever are the policy makers, they look into the problems. So in my first video, I also told you that problem is basically a discrepancy between the desired state of affairs and actual state of affairs. So, for example, if you have made a target that 90% of the population should have universal health coverage, and let's say the actual is that only 50% of the population has got coverage to the healthcare services, then there is a discrepancy that you wanted 90%, the actual is 50%, and there is a difference between 90% and 50%. So, this is a problem. So, a list of all the problems are made, all those public domain problems where there is a discrepancy between the desired state of affairs and the actual state of affairs, that is taken. So obviously you will come across a list of so many different problems. So what you do is, for every problem you look at what are the reasons for that problem. Like, for example, if the coverage is low, why is the coverage low? Is it because of poverty? Is it because of lack of infrastructure? Is it because lack of finances? Is it because lack of human resources? So on and so forth. So you will analyze the problem scientifically. And based on that scientific analysis, you will come up with a list of different solutions. So for every problem, you dissect it, you suggest solutions, and again, those solutions are put in priority. Again, there are different ways of setting your priorities, and then what happens is that you deal them one by one. So this is what we call as a rational or the scientific model. Now, there's a problem with this model, that obviously the problem lists are huge, especially in developing countries. If you see, there are so many problems that it's very difficult if you have to tackle every problem one by one. The other thing is that the solutions might be very expensive. So if you go with the solutions, your finances or the general economic condition of your country may not allow for those solutions to be put in practice. So it's more of a theoretical exercise where you would come up with different solutions, but in fact you cannot put them into practice because of various practical constraints. So Then we come to another model of policy making, which is known as the bounded rationality. Now, the bounded rationality actually, as the word says, it is a combination of the scientific method, but it is also bound. So, in other words, you are very much aware of the constraints, the practical constraints that you have. So, you will look up the problems again. You will take them by your priority list. You will look at what are the root causes of those problems. You will analyze them. You will come up with the solutions. But then the solutions, you basically would pick up those solutions which you think are practically feasible, that you can actually put them in practice. So you will take a combination of a few things that would be more practical, and you would put them into practice. So that is what we call as bounded rationality. The third model is known as the incrementalist model. So incremental model is more practical model. It's more a bureaucratic model. What happens in incrementalist model, or some people also call it incrementalism, is that you would look at your existing policy and you would make slight changes to that step by step in incremental, we call it incremental changes. So small changes, and then you see how much is the uptake of those solutions, how much those solutions they give you positive results, and based on that you would further tune your policy. So either you would move back to your previous position, or you would take it further up. So step by step. So you have got a ground policy, or you have got a baseline policy, you make a small change to that, and then you look at the results, then again you make a small change, and so on and so forth. So that is the incrementalist model of policy making. Then we have got the fourth one, which is known as the mix scanning approach. So mix scanning approach is more of a combination of bounded rationality and incrementalist model. So what you would do is you would quickly scan your environment for those problems which need urgent public addressal, and then you pick up those problems, and in those problems you make small incremental changes. So you go according to some of the principles of bounded rationality, and at the same time you put some principles of incrementalist model into that, and that is what we call as the mix scanning model of policy making. So these are the four models of policy making, and for practical reasons the policymakers usually pick up one of these methods to formulate policies. Now in developed countries, where the policy making is more of a scientific thing, you've got policy think tanks, and you've got various academia and intelligentsia involved into the policy making. There you would see that the policy making is more of a research based process, where you would see that there are researches done into the policy domains. There are think tanks who work onto these things. So you would see that policy making is a result of either rational or the bounded rationality models. In developing economies, in monarchies, or in elitist economies, you would see that policy making is more of an incrementalist model, that you would see that the policies are usually, even if they are made, they are seldom changed. If they are changed, then they are changed in very small increments. So for practical reason, incrementalist and mix scannings are more seen in the developing economies. Now coming to the fact that policy making is more of a power, what you call a process in which the power is exercised by different segments of the society. Please keep in mind the policy is result of a struggle. There are various stakeholders. I think in one of my future lectures I will talk about stakeholders as well, and how do we do a stakeholder analysis to see which stakeholders yield more sort of a clout or more influence on policy making. But nevertheless, remember, whenever you are making a policy, there are various stakeholders. These stakeholders can be the government, these stakeholders can be the public, these stakeholders can be the different interest groups whose interest could be either affected in a positive way or in a negative way. Like for example, if I give you the example of health policy, and if a country is making health policy, there would be various players, there would be various stakeholders, and these stakeholders are obviously your government, your non-government sector, your public, your politicians, your pharmaceutical industry, your healthcare industry, your insurance industry, so on and so forth. So they would be using their own pressures to ensure that their interests are taken care of. So whosoever yields more power by either that they've got they are more close to the power making circles, or they have got financial powers, or they have got the ability to influence the mind of the public, like the media, electronic and print media, even the social media. So how much power they yield. So policy is a sort of a is an outcome of interaction between these different stakeholders, these different pressure groups. Now, for that, you need to understand what is power, because all these stakeholders are trying to yield their power. Now, in very simple words, in anthropology, power means the ability to influence the decisions of the other. For example, if A influences the decision making for B, then A is said to have yielded power over B. Now, this power comes from different domains. Anthropologists, they say that power is rested in different domains and in different contexts. Like, for example, power can come through what we call as charismatic sources of power. Like certain people have got charisma. They could be like populist regimes, it could be the populist leaders who are role models, who are liked by millions of the people, and whatever they say, people follow them. So there is a cult following, or there is a mass following, which is associated with charisma, leading, which is linked to their personalities. So they yield power by the way of their charisma. So we call it as the charismatic authority, charismatic powers. One is that, and you would see that in different populist regimes in countries which have got populist uprisings, or where there are populist governments which come through their slogan or political rhetoric. Number two is the what we call as the power as the traditional authority. In many countries, monarchies, or where there's presidential systems like the United States of America, whosoever is in power, let's say the president of the United States, whosoever, ABC, that seat has got a lot of powers. I mean, he not only influences decisions all over the United States of America, rather he influences decisions all over the world. So that is what we call as power by traditional authority. Similarly, if you look at the Commonwealth of Nations, like those countries which have been ruled by the United Kingdom somewhere in the past, in all those economies, you have got the Minister of Health, and you have got different other people who are into the healthcare sector. But the Secretary of State for Health is the most powerful person. He is the most powerful bureaucrat who makes all the decision making. So traditionally, whosoever is sitting on that seat has got a lot of power. So this is the traditional power, the traditional power by authority. And sometimes power is also yielded as what we call as non-decision making. And that is quite interesting, because power as non-decision making is that simply what the powerful the power circles, like whether they're the politicians, whether they're the governments, whether they are the military juntas, what they do is that they create such an environment where the masses cannot think of those things which would go against the interest of the power circles. So in other words, people are not able to think about their genuine issues. So for example, certain in certain countries, the powerful elite, they might create a situation of law and order where people are more worried about their own safety. So they cannot think of what the economy should look like, whether what sort of healthcare services should be provided to them. They are more concerned about their own personal safety. So this is another form of power yielding, in which the powerful circles, they make such a decisions that the people, they cannot think about their general problems. So this is known as power as what you call non-decision making, that you are not making any decisions. Why? Because you've created such an environment that people are not able to think about their general problems. And this happens, we have seen like that, it's happened in different countries all over the world. I don't want to give you examples. I mean, if you just look into newspapers, or if you hear tune to the news bulletins every day, you will come across many different examples of this type of things going all over the world. So policy is related with power. Policy flows through the barrels of power, because policy is made by those people who are in power, and this power can be yielded, as I told you, by traditional authority, by charismatic personalities, or by non-decision making. And the process of different stakeholders trying to influence or safeguard their interests again, and it's a sort of a wrestling between these different stakeholders, which ultimately translates into a policy, whether that could be a health policy, whether that's an educational policy, whether that's a governance policy, whether that's foreign policy, any type of policy. And again, the same goes at the national level, the same goes at the state level, the same goes at the organizational level as well. So in other words, the interest of different group, that defines the policy, and different groups can have different interests. Again, whosoever yields power, their interest would be safeguarded in the policy. So what point I wanted to make here in this lecture is that the models are one thing of policy making, looking into different problems and things, but at the same time, which problems would come up on the radar screen are things that is defined by who has got the power and how that power translates into policy making. So I hope you have understood something in this small video lecture, where I talked about the different models of policy making, and also tried to explain the concept of power in policy making. If you have liked my videos, a subscribe would be fantastic. Do share my videos with your friends, and also comment on the videos. If you've got any question, you can put it down in the comment section below. I usually take a couple of hours to get back to questions, and I try my level best to answer those. Have a good day. Bye bye.